Welcome to week 5, part 3, cameras, environment, and rendering. We will do a quick introduction to the cameras because we're only going to be using them as placeholders for our renders, as opposed to altering the properties of the camera itself. Your cameras are very important because they define how your scene is displayed. We have been using Cinema's default camera, as you can see up here, anytime that we have been in our perspective view. So anywhere that we are moving, we are in Cinema's default camera. To create a new camera, click on the camera object down here, and this will take out a camera. You can see the camera in the object manager, and it is one of the few rare objects that do not come out at 000. Instead, it comes out at wherever your view is at. So if I zoom out, you can see that my camera was placed wherever my default camera was. Your cameras are regular objects, which means that you can move them, you can rotate them, and scaling works a little bit differently because instead of scaling the camera itself, you scale the focal length and the focus distance of it. To actually access your camera, you have to activate it by going to this little button here and clicking once. You know you're in the camera in a few ways. First, up here it says camera instead of default camera, and wherever I name my camera will be reflected here. And here's the little white icon that tells you that you're in the camera. To get out of the camera, just click on that once. Once I am inside of my camera, I can move around my viewport, and wherever I am moving is where my camera will be placed. So you can see how this can be very helpful when setting up your renders. As you're working through your file, let's say you find an angle that you really like, you can set up a camera there as a placeholder, get out of it, and then continue working on your file however you'd like. And once you're done with the changes, you can jump into your camera and render. You can have multiple cameras. So let's say I like this angle. That could be my render 2. And then this angle here could be my render 3. Notice that I'm still in my default camera, so I can see all of my cameras from above, and I can continue working. Let's say I want to change the lighting, move some of my objects around, and then once I'm happy and ready to render, I can simply jump into my cameras and send them to render. This is really all we're going to talk about cameras. I included some various shots to help you when it comes to your camera's positioning. So don't simply just take the render as a full shot. Look around where you're at, check which angle makes for a more interesting composition, and then take your render. Alright, next is the environment option. So this menu here shows you a few things that you can add to finalize your render. The first option is the sky object. The sky object is just an infinitely large sphere that the center of is at 000, so it completely surrounds us. And you can apply a texture to it. So this is really helpful when doing HDRI lighting. HDRI lighting stands for High Dynamic Range Imaging. This means that they are high quality images with increased luminosity, so they give your materials really nice reflections. In cinema, HDRI lighting is a good way to add realistic lighting and reflections to your scene, but just know that they are pretty high quality images, so they do increase your render time. And they go hand in hand with global illumination, which is a render effect that I will discuss a little bit later that significantly increases your render time. Your HDRIs are applied to your sky object. I will show you how to do this now, but again, just remember that we do need the global illumination effect to really bring this to life. However, I will make a new material, call it HDRI, turn off my color and my reflectance, and only turn on my luminance. In the texture of my luminance, I want to upload an HDRI map. There are a bunch of them online, but this website is pretty good. It's called Polyhaven, and here you can find a bunch of different HDRIs. For example, you can go to skies, you can find some studio lighting, outdoor lighting, etc. You can pick any of these and then just click on download. This is going to download a .exr file, and this is your HDRI. You're gonna go back to Cinema and load that into the Luminance Channel Texture tab. This is an external texture, so you want to make sure that when you're done, you're also sending that package. So you can either save it here or just remember to save your assets later on. All right, now I will take this HDRI and drop it on my sky, and you will see how that looks. I will set up a render here with a camera. And first, I'm going to hide my HDRI, so this is going to be my first render without it. And now let's render it with it. You can see that by itself, the HDRI lighting provides some great reflections for reflective surfaces, but it is important that there's also other sources of lighting on the scene, and that when we get to rendering, we turn on global illumination, because this is going to impact how the rays of lights are actually affecting our scene. Next, we have the floor object. So you can see that for this scene here, I just have a plane that is serving as my floor. I'm going to hide my plane and take out a floor object. And this is a relatively straightforward object. It is just a plane of geometry that lies flat on the XZ plane of the world coordinate system, and it stretches to infinity. That's really it about the floor. Next, we have the background object. This object allows you to put a material on it, which is going to show up as the background of your file, overriding the default black. So I will create a new material, call this background, and load in an image that I already downloaded. Drop that on my background, and now you can see that wherever I am moving my camera, that background is staying still. And if I were to render it, instead of having the default Cinema 4D black, you get this background. You should always try to put high quality images as your loaded textures, and not just the background object, but also your materials whenever possible. A good website to find high quality images is unsplash.com. These are some really good high quality images that you can download for free, but if you are doing commercial work with them, you have to credit the photographers. Okay, the last thing that we're going to talk about is rendering. You already know how to render your work. However, there are a few more settings in the render settings that we should go over. Every property in the render settings affects how your final render is going to look. We're only going to discuss these top ones because these bottom ones are a little bit more advanced and some other ones are for animation. First, we have this little arrow right here, which contains a bunch of presets that you can select for things like film or video or screen or even print. For example, if I select a 2x3, you notice how my save frames change. And if I send this to render, this is how that would render. So when you select a preset, your width and height change as well as your resolution. You can also change the width and height manually. So you can input here 1920 by 1080 as an example. This is a table for some of the most common ratios that you're going to use. You also have this little check mark here for lock ratio. This just locks these numbers together. So if you increase one, the other one will also increase. And then here you have the resolution. Your resolution is the amount of detail that your image contains. For a file that's going to stay in the computer, 72 dpi is the correct resolution. However, if you wanted to print your render, you would have to change this to 300 dpi. Next, let's talk about some effects to finalize your render. These things are optional and they should be the absolute last things added to your file because they exponentially increase your render time. The first effect I actually mentioned earlier, it is called global illumination. Global illumination is the interaction of light between different objects within a scene. It calculates how light is reflected off of those objects and how it bounces and the color bleeds. This helps give a more realistic look to your renders. The light also reaches areas that normal light sources would not. The main drawback to global illumination is that it increases your render time exponentially. To apply it, simply go to Effect and select Global Illumination. And you see this here with a check mark, that means that it is applied. Going back to this file of ours that has the HDRI in it, I'm going to do a render with all three. All these little cubes just tell you that the global illumination is turned on. So notice, this was my render without HDRI. This is my render with HDRI, and this is my render with HDRI and global illumination. You can see it is quite a drastic difference. Also notice that this is much bigger. The reason is that this one is 1920 by 1080, so this is a high definition image. The other ones are 1280 by 720, which is cinema's default width and height. The other render effect is ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion looks at two objects and the distance between them and simulates shadow. It is a distance-based shading trick and it works very effectively, but again, it does increase your render time. To apply it again, just go to Effect and select Ambient Occlusion. Look at the difference between no ambient occlusion, ambient occlusion. See the shadows that get added on the bottom? These are just because of that effect. So this is how you can get your renders to look more realistic. You start adding good lighting, HDRI lighting, global illumination, ambient occlusion. Just look at the render time. Do not forget this. These are fine because there's only a few objects, but still it went from 1 second to 5 seconds to 6 seconds. So imagine if you have a file with a bunch of objects in it that already takes a while to render. If you add these effects, you will take much longer. So just keep that in mind. Also make sure that you're adding these effects completely at the end, because otherwise if you add them now and you do a render preview just to see how things are going, it will take longer to render as well. So if you don't want this and you already added them, just check them off. Continue working on your file as it is, and then when you're done and ready to render it out, then you add those render effects. And that's it.